Great, wonderful. Well, great. Well, thank you for joining me today. My name is Diana Sugiyuchi, and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist with Nourish Family Nutrition. And today I want to share with you some information about how to keep your immune system running as well as it possibly can during this time when, not only are we worried about COVID, but also we're entering flu season, cold season. So really just to share with you some tips of how you can use food and different areas of lifestyle to help enhance your own immune system. So in order to talk about our immune system, we really need to focus on the microbiome. So the microbiome is basically all of the um, bacteria and different microbes that live in our digestive tract. So a lot of our immune system is actually in there, as much as 70% of our immune system. So by focusing on keeping the microbiome working as well as it possibly can and encouraging the growth of good bacteria, that is going to help keep you healthy and keep your immune system going strong. So that's really what we're going to be focused on today, is how can we encourage the growth of those good microbes that are going to help our immune system and our health. All right, so let's talk about what exactly is the microbiome. So it is, again, all of those microbes that live in our digestive tract. And believe it or not, there are more bacteria in our GI system than all of the cells in our human body. So it's almost like we have an entirely different world living within ourselves. And that sounds kind of freaky, but it's a really good thing because those bacteria actually help to keep us healthy. They affect our mental health, our mood, and of course, our immune system. And as we're going to see in some coming slides, everyone has different bacteria living within their microbiome and have a different amount of bacteria. But in general, there's anywhere from 300 to 500 different species living in our microbiome at any one time. And all those bacteria weigh between 2 to 5 pounds. So the genome of all of this separate world that lives within us is actually far greater than our own human genome. So the way that we take care of our gut health is going to be really, really important for our own personal health. And here's how the microbiome affects different aspects of our health. And of course, that's not the only thing that affects health. It's an interplay between genetics, environment, the things that we put into our body, the things that we surround ourselves with, as well as that microbiome. So a lot of research that has been done on the microbiome centers around how those bacteria affect our weight. And what we know is that people who are obese have different bacteria in their microbiome than people who are not. So there's a lot of really interesting research going on with that. Of course, intestinal diseases such as IBS, IBD, are affected by the bacteria that live in our gut, as well as the development of certain cancers. And this isn't just limited to digestive cancers like colon cancer or stomach cancer, but what we're actually finding out is that things like liver cancer are actually affected by our microbiome as well. Chronic diseases, diabetes, heart disease, risk of stroke have a very strong connection to those microbes that live in our digestive tract, as well as mood, sleep, and psychological disorders. So, some mood disorders can actually be traced back to the bacteria that we have living in our gut. And then the big one that we're here to talk about today is our immune function. So the good news is that by taking care of your microbiome and by doing everything that you can to help those good bacteria, you're going to be helping all of these different aspects of your health. So rather than, taking the traditional view of kind of just focusing on our weight, for example, and then tackling, our mood from a different aspect. Really focusing on the microbiome is going to help all of these different things. So the bacteria in our gut not only is different from person to person, but it also changes over time and changes in response to different life events. So without getting too in depth into the different kinds of bacteria, what this chart kind of shows is how, just looking at the different colors and the different kinds of bacteria is how the percentage of any one kind changes as we age and changes in response to things like malnutrition, antibiotic treatment. And then as you can see on the adult one, depending on whether we're at a healthy weight or an obese weight. And again, we don't know kind of, is it, the chicken and the egg phenomenon, which comes first? Is it the microbiome that's out of whack, or does, one cause the other? But our microbiome is not something that is set in stone. It is something that we absolutely can change by different lifestyle factors, and that also changes naturally over time. So here are all the factors that influence our microbiome and our immune health. And we're going to talk about all of these today. Of course, the one that we're going to talk about most in depth is diet, since I'm a dietitian, and that is my favorite subject to talk about. So of course, what we eat affects these bacteria, because think about how often we eat, several times a day. So we're always feeding these bacteria and replenishing them. So making sure that we're doing that in the right way is going to be very important. We're going to talk a little bit about prebiotics and probiotics, talk about how alcohol is going to affect the microbiome, different medications. Believe it or not, physical activity has an effect on our microbiome as well as sleep and stress. So let's jump in with healthy diet and talk about how this is going to affect our microbiome. So first of all, I want to draw your attention to this little plate over on the side of the screen. So this is kind of my take on the healthy portion plate that replaced the food guide pyramid way back, I think it was in 2010, which is really a great visualization for how we should be eating at every meal. And the thing that I really want you to take away from looking at this plate is that fully half of it is devoted to produce. So fruits, veggies, and then another quarter of it is devoted to whole grains and starchy veggies. And what all of that has in common is that the fruits, the veggies, the whole grains are really good sources of fiber. And when we're talking about our microbiome and our immune function, that fiber is going to be really, really important, because those bacteria eat the fiber, they love the fiber, that is their fuel source. Another thing that is going to affect those bacteria is the kind of fat that we're eating. So, way back in the 80s and 90s, we were all about the low-fat diets, just cutting it out. And what we've come to realize is that that is not the healthy thing to do. What is healthy is focusing on the right kind of fat. So that is going to be really important, whether you're eating saturated or unsaturated fat. We're going to get more in depth into that, as well as the type of protein that you're eating, whether you're eating animal protein, so meat or poultry, or vegetable proteins such as beans. That's going to make a big difference in your microbiome. And the goal here is not that we want to cut a lot of foods out. Definitely as a dietitian, when I work with people, my focus is not on, just cutting out and what can we eliminate from your diet, but what can we add into your diet that is going to add things that are not only healthy, but things that are going to be really tasty. And whenever you approach change of any sort from that point of view of adding things in rather than taking away, you're going to have far more success with that. So what I want to do is talk about different foods that you can add in starting right now that are going to help to increase your immune function and keep that running smoothly. So first of all, we are going to start with this little diagram of different kinds of proteins and how that affects our immune function. So this is a diagram that I took from the Journal of Translational Medicine. And again, you don't need to worry so much about the different kinds of bacteria here. It's just to kind of illustrate the difference in kind of the good ones and the bad ones. So protein, our body needs to help replenish our muscle mass, to help with cell turnover. And even aside from the role that protein plays in our microbiome, it plays a big role in keeping our immune system functioning really well. So first thing is, if you're not eating enough protein, you really want to make sure that you're starting to do that. And when I say enough protein, that's probably going to look like having some kind of protein at every meal and every snack. Different sources of protein are going to include animal sources such as meat or seafood or dairy, as well as plant proteins such as beans. Soy is a great protein, tempeh, nuts are good protein. So you really want to make sure that you're getting in enough, and then you want to kind of look at the kinds of protein. So we know that plant proteins lead to, if you come over here to where it says SCFAs, those are short chain fatty acids, and those are really, really good for our health. And what happens is when you eat plant proteins, these bacteria in our microbiome help to digest that protein and actually produce these short chain fatty acids that lead to a decrease in inflammation and an increase in your gut barrier, which is very protective for your overall health and your immune system. When you eat animal protein, however, it actually decreases the production of short chain fatty acids and can lead to more chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease. Now, I want to be really clear that it is not that you want to cut out animal proteins, and a lot of this has to do with whether or not that is lean protein. So are you eating a fatty hamburger with some cheese on it, or are you eating seafood? That's going to make a big difference. But we do know that the plant proteins, because a lot of them have fiber with them, are actually going to be really good for our digestive tract. So an easy thing that you can do is have a meatless meal once per week. So one of my favorite ways to do that is, if you're doing like Taco Tuesday, is to use black beans in your tacos or enchiladas. A lot of people will do meatless Monday, where you just won't have meat one day a week, and have protein from a different source such as beans or soy, and that can be a really good way to go. One of my favorites is doing like an edamame stir fry. Edamame is a great source of protein. Add a lot of veggies in there and you have a really, really delicious meatless meal. All right, so let's go on here and talk about some of these sources of plant proteins. What are they? So again, any kind of beans, and people will ask me, what kind of beans are the best to eat? And my answer is all of them. When you're talking about nutrition, variety is really the name of the game. So garbanzo beans are good, chickpeas, black beans, lentils are also going to be a good option. Certainly, I feel like, as we're headed into the fall and the winter months, it's a lot easier to eat beans, having soups or stews, casseroles, really good ways to get those in. Nuts and nut butters are another really good source of protein, and they also have good healthy fats, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So those are also going to be really good for your immune function. And anything made with soy, so tofu, tempeh, edamame, are good sources of complete proteins and something that you should add in to your diet for sure. All right, so now we are going to talk about different kinds of fat and how that affects our microbiome. And what's really interesting about this is that, the previous view is that, saturated fat, the kind that we find from animal sources, fatty meats, cheeses, is the kind that really clogs up your arteries and can lead to heart disease. But what we found is that it's not so much that direct effect, but the effect that the fat has on our microbiome, which then influences cardiovascular risks. So it's the same information, that we want to limit our saturated fat and increase our unsaturated, but just a little bit of difference in the understanding on how that works in our bodies. So the unsaturated fat is the kind that you want to eat more of most of the time. So that's going to come from things such as plant sources, olive oils, corn oil, as well as things like avocados and nuts. We're going to get into this a little bit more. And the saturated fat, the kind that you really want to limit, is going to be from animal sources and also from coconut. So I know that coconut has gotten a reputation as being a bit of a health food in the last several years, but in actuality, it's a saturated fat and does not do good things for our immune function or our microbiome. So what happens is the higher percentage of your diet that is saturated fat versus these unsaturated fats is it actually decreases your insulin sensitivity, which increases your risk for diabetes. So if you've been given a diagnosis of prediabetes or diabetes, not only do you want to watch the kind of carbohydrates you're eating, but you really want to take a look at the kind of fat you're eating and replace some of that saturated fat with the unsaturated fat. All right, so saturated fat, again, is going to be things like butter and cheese and fatty meat and coconut. And generally you can tell it's solid at room temperature. You know, you cook bacon and it's liquid and you pour off the grease and let it sit and it turns solid. That's a saturated fat. So again, it's not that we want to completely eliminate these from our diet, right? A life without cheese, to me, sounds pretty sad. It's that we want to have these less often. And the fats that we want to have more often are going to be the unsaturated ones. So liquid vegetable oils. So saute your veggies in olive oil instead of butter, and you've made a really good replacement. One of my favorites is using avocado instead of cheese. So if you're making a sandwich and you like to have a little bit of cheese on there, put some slices of avocado on there, and that's going to really be doing a whole lot for your immune system and that microbiome. Plus it tastes really good. Nuts and nut butters are a great source of really good healthy fat. And I know sometimes people will avoid eating nuts and nut butters because you look at the amount of calories in there and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this has so many calories. But those calories are coming from that really good healthy fat that we need for our immune function, and also fat helps our food to taste really good. So if you leave the fat out of your food, you're going to be missing out on the taste, and we need a certain amount of fat in our diet to help absorb different vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and K. You're not going to absorb those as much if you're not eating enough fat. And then we have the kind of fat that's in salmon and other fatty fish, such as mackerel, anchovies, and sardines. And those are those omega-3 fatty acids. These are particularly anti-inflammatory, really good for our immune function, as well as our brain health. So if you like salmon or these other fatty fishes, try to eat that at least twice per week, and that's going to be doing a lot of good for your health as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about prebiotics. So just to be clear, there's two different things we're going to talk about. There's prebiotics and then there's probiotics. So prebiotics is basically just the fiber from plants, from fruits, from veggies, from whole grains. And what happens is that this stimulates that healthy bacteria. So by eating more fiber, you're actually going to be encouraging the good beneficial bacteria to grow in your microbiome, which is going to then help your immune function. And the reason that this kind of bacteria is so good is because they produce those short chain fatty acids that are anti-inflammatory and help with immune function. So whenever you're given the option of choosing a whole grain versus a refined grain, always go for the whole grain version. So what that means is, have brown rice instead of white rice, whole wheat bread instead of white bread, starchy veggies such as sweet potatoes, corn, all of those are really good sources of fiber, and those are going to count as well. Certainly, leafy green vegetables, carrots, fruit, anything that is a veggie and has that fiber on it is going to be a really great source of prebiotics. And you do need to make sure that you're eating the whole fruit or the whole veggie. The juice doesn't have the fiber in it, so you're not going to get those valuable prebiotics. So absolutely, remember that plate back from the beginning where it had 3/4 of the plate devoted to fruits, veggies, and whole grains. You want to make sure that every time you look, that you eat, your plate looks like that plate, and you're going to be getting plenty of prebiotics. Now, there are some foods that have particularly good kinds of prebiotic fiber. Soluble fiber, the kind of fiber that we get from oats and from beans, and that is in the pectin in apples, is really, really good for our microbiome. So another really good reason to do that meatless Monday or use beans more often, because of that really good soluble fiber. You know, we're getting again into the fall months. Make some oatmeal for breakfast. That's a really good way to go. I actually have a really good smoothie recipe, and you put oats into the smoothie and you blend them on up, and it makes it really filling, and you get that good prebiotic fiber. So you can try that with pretty much any smoothie. Just make sure you blend it enough. Apples for sure. Artichokes are a great source of prebiotic fiber. And one of my favorite things to do is I will get bags of frozen artichokes, and I will just thaw them out and throw them in my salad at lunch or add them to casseroles. They're really, really yummy. I know bananas tend to get a bad rap, but they are actually a great form of prebiotic fiber, and the less ripe they are, the more of that good prebiotic fiber they have. And chocolate. So I'm sure you have all heard about the health benefits of dark chocolate, and it's actually true. It is, among its other many benefits, it has a good amount of really healthy prebiotic fiber. And you're probably saying, what? There's fiber in chocolate, but that cocoa powder, the cocoa solids, that is actually fiber that our body can't digest, and those bacteria in our microbiome absolutely love it. So whether you're eating very dark chocolate or using cocoa powder, throwing that in your smoothie, for example, that's going to add a really good dose of prebiotic fiber, as well as some other things we're going to talk about in just a minute. All right, so just a little review of how to include prebiotics in your everyday diet. It's just a fancy word to say eat more fiber, eat more fruits and veggies and whole grains. So here are some easy ways to do that. You know, the cooking with garlic and onions. Garlic and onions are also a really unique and good form of prebiotic fiber. Make sure that you're getting that half plate of veggies with every meal. So if you're sitting down to dinner and you don't see half of your plate full of veggies, how can you add more? How can you make your plate look different? And of course, substitute whole grains for refined grains whenever possible. And if you're coming from a place where, you know, I hear a lot of people say, oh, I don't like white rice, or I don't like brown rice, I just like white rice. Try this. Try doing, you know, half white rice and half brown rice, mixing it together, and then gradually decreasing your portion of white rice. And that can be a really easy way to kind of make that transition to more whole grains. All right, so another thing that is going to be key in helping your immune system is polyphenols. And what these are very powerful antioxidants, and it's hard to get these from supplements. And in fact, you're going to see I haven't really talked very much about supplements, and there's a really good reason for that. It's because we absorb nutrients much better when they are in whole food form. And one of the reasons for that is likely because of the way that the different nutrients, different vitamins, antioxidants all kind of work together with each other when we get them from foods versus extracting them and putting them in supplements. So polyphenols, definitely something that is not hard to get from food sources, but something that you want to include more often because it is such a good antioxidant, and the fact that it's really going to help your immune system. So coffee and tea, whether it's black tea or green tea, are actually the places that most Americans get the majority of their antioxidants every day, mostly from coffee. So if you like coffee and tea, drink up. It's really healthy for you with those polyphenols. Berries, any kind of berry, all those bright colors are what have those polyphenols and are very, you know, full of antioxidants. Red wine, very much in moderation with that. We're going to talk in a bit about alcohol and how that affects microbiome and immune function. And look, there's that chocolate again. Not only is chocolate a great source of prebiotics, but it's also a really good source of polyphenols. So you know, having some really dark chocolate, some cocoa powder is a great idea. Of course, you don't want to negate that by, doing a lot of really sugary foods. You want it to be really dark chocolate, have just a little bit every now and then. And another issue with supplements, particularly with polyphenols, is that they can interfere with your absorption of iron from other foods. And that's something you don't want to do, because when you get anemic, you're going to have very low energy, and it is also going to interfere with immune function. So much, much better to get all of your polyphenols, vitamins, all of that from whole food sources rather than from supplements. Speaking of supplements, let's talk about probiotics. So I know this is one of the biggest growth areas in the supplement industry. A lot of physicians are unfortunately still recommending probiotics, and you'll see why I said unfortunately. But the general consensus in the medical community right now is that probiotics are not recommended. Except in very, very specific cases. I'm going to tell you why. So probiotics are different than prebiotics. So prebiotics are just the fiber in food, but probiotics are actually living organisms that provide some health benefits. So if you've ever eaten yogurt before, it says on the label that it has a certain amount of active cultures, and those are actually probiotics. In order to have a probiotic supplement, it needs to meet all of these different criteria in order to be effective. And if it fails to meet even one of these, then it's not going to do us as people any good. So first of all, it has to be able to survive the trip through our digestive system. And keep in mind, our stomachs are very, very, very acidic. And there's a lot of live living organisms that just can't survive that high acid environment. So that's the first thing that they need to be able to do. Second, they have to be the kind of bacteria that are going to colonize our GI tract. So not all bacteria that is beneficial in the lab, where it shows some benefits, are going to actually want to hang out and live in our GI tract. These bacteria also need to stay alive through the trip of being put into tablet form or pill form, through sitting on, the shelf at Walgreens, to, their trip through our digestive tract. And they need to be the kind of bacteria that actually like to eat the same food that we do, because a lot of beneficial bacteria doesn't eat the same things that we do. So that's another thing. And they have to be able to have a beneficial effect and then survive the whole processing, storage, and transportation process. So as you can see, it's a lot of things to have to meet, and it's very, very difficult to formulate a supplement that can do all of this. And in fact, a lot of them on the shelf fall short in one or several places on that list. Here's what we know about probiotics, and keep in mind, there's been a lot of different studies, but this is the current consensus. So diarrhea, it may reduce diarrhea by 1 day, but there's a lot of studies that show that probiotics actually have no effect on that. So even, encouraging probiotics if you're taking antibiotics, probably not going to be super helpful. Inflammatory bowel disease, generally no benefits for Crohn's, and IBS. There's some research that a couple of different strains may be beneficial, but again, that's a big word there, may. It hasn't been shown to be conclusive. So in general, what I recommend is saving your money on the supplements. They're probably not going to hurt you, but there's better things that you could be spending your money on, namely fruits and veggies and whole grains, and foods that have natural probiotics in them. And these are all going to be fermented foods. So things like yogurt and kefir, fermented cabbage like sauerkraut and kimchi, fermented soy such as miso and tempeh, as well as, look, there's that dark chocolate again. It also has probiotics in it. So lots of good sources of natural probiotics, and that is the way that I would recommend that you go, rather than spending your money on supplements. So let's talk quickly about antibiotic use. And certainly antibiotics, if you are sick with a bacterial infection, you're going to need to take them. But taking antibiotics for things that aren't going to help, such as a viral infection like a cold, actually end up hurting our bodies, because not only do the antibiotics get rid of the harmful bacteria, but they wipe out a lot of bacteria. And we've seen, even after a course of regular antibiotics, that the microbiome of someone who takes those is radically altered after one, 7 or 10-day course of antibiotics. So unless it's absolutely necessary for you to take antibiotics, do not do it. And just, going back to how the microbiome not only affects our immune function, but also affects weight. Looking at these maps of, obesity in the United States and the use of antibiotics in the United States, they kind of match up. And so that really goes back to what we know about how microbiome affects immunity. So just really, really kind of an interesting study there. So again, if you're using antibiotics, make sure that you're only using them for a bacterial infection. Make sure that they're prescribed by your doctor, and just be aware that whenever you take antibiotics, you are running a risk of radically changing your microbiome. And while you're taking the antibiotics to get better, you're actually, you may be hurting your immune system in the long run. Okay, so alcohol, we know that red wine, we saw it has polyphenols, but alcohol changes the composition of our microbiome as well, and not for the better. So when we drink excessive alcohol, it alters those bacteria and decreases the percentage of good bacteria and makes our intestines more permeable. We see more inflammation, and we see that a lot of liver disease is actually caused by microbiome imbalances. So if you're going to drink alcohol, and we know that there are some health benefits to it, you want to make sure that you're doing so moderately. So what that means is that for women, that is 1 drink per day. And watch the size of that too. I know that a serving of alcohol is 4 to 6 ounces, or of wine, I'm sorry, is 4 to 6 ounces, not those big giant wine glasses that they give us at restaurants. And for men, it is 2 drinks per day. So if you're not drinking, do not start. And if you do, you really want to keep it to that moderate amount, because you are going to be doing some damage to your immune function. So we know that physical activity is actually really beneficial for our microbiome, and it's also really, really beneficial for our immune function. And in fact, at the first sign of feeling a little bit under the weather, what most of us do is we rest and, kind of let things take its course. But there's been a lot of research that shows that doing moderate intensity physical activity, even when you're a little bit under the weather at the start of a cold or other illness, can actually help to increase your immune function. So as much as you're able to just move, you don't have to be, getting your heart rate up super high and breaking a lot of a sweat, but just moving more. So getting out and walking, if you like to dance, dancing around your house. If you live in a house with stairs, maybe, quote unquote, forgetting something every time you go up or downstairs, and doing the stairs twice can be a really good way to go. But we've seen a lot of good studies about physical activity and how it helps our microbiome and helps our immune function. So bottom line, we all should be moving a little bit more, and the way to make that sustainable so that you keep doing it on a regular basis is to find something that you enjoy doing. And the problem with exercise that I see a lot of people doing is, you come out strong and you start doing, a new exercise routine, particularly, around the new year, right? The gyms get a lot more crowded and everyone's all gung-ho, and then you just can't maintain that pace. So do something that's sustainable, do it at a rate that's going to be sustainable, and do it on a regular basis, and that's where you're going to see the best benefits. So sleep has a huge effect on immune function and microbiome. And I see this a lot in the work that I do with my clients, working on their nutrition, is that we find that sleep affects so many other aspects. It affects hunger levels. When you're sleep deprived, it makes you crave more high fat, high sugar foods. And we know that those are the kind of foods that have a detrimental effect on our microbiome and our immune function. And just getting enough sleep, sleeping at the right times, can also help to encourage the growth of that good bacteria and our immune function. Reducing stress is going to be a big one. I know that's, increasingly difficult in this world that we live in, but really doing something to manage stress is also going to be very important for your immune function. And, exercise is a great way to manage stress. If you have a hobby you like to do, that's a really good way to manage stress. Deep breathing, meditation, there's all kinds of apps you can get for that. That's also going to be really important for immune function as well. So just to wrap up, tips for a healthy gut and an immune function are to include more produce and whole grains. Remember, 3/4 of your plate every meal should be full of produce and whole grains. You want to limit animal fats and increase fats from vegetable sources such as olive oils, nuts, avocados. All of those are going to be really beneficial. You want to consume foods rich in probiotics, natural probiotics and polyphenols. Get lots of exercise, do something you love, and limit those antibiotics and alcohol, and you will be doing everything that you can do to keep your immune function running well. All right, I know that that was an awful lot of information in this presentation today. If you have any questions, please get in touch. Here is our contact information, and thank you for attending this. I hope you've learned some good information.
Well, thank you very much, Diana. We'd like to thank Diana and Nourish family for their great information and knowledge. I know I learned a lot. I think I'm doing a lot of good things, but also can certainly improve on some things in my lifestyle. So we'd like to thank them for participating in our 2020 client event.